Hello everyone, I'm very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
They say family is supposed to be your safe place, your roots, the people who'll stand by you even when the rest of the world wants to kick you while you're down. But for me, family always felt more like an audience, half bored, half judgmental, and always waiting for me to trip over my own shoelaces, just to laugh harder. I grew up the oddball in a house full of practical, salt-of-the-earth people. My dad was a mechanic, my mom was a nurse, my older brother played varsity football and rebuilt his first engine at 15. And then there was me, sensitive, artsy, quiet, the kid who asked too many questions and never quite figured out how to sit right at the table without someone commenting on it. I learned early that silence was safer than trying. Every joke I cracked missed the mark. Every hobby I had was weird or a phase. And leading the pack of torment was always my cousin Derek. Derek, who was barely a year older than me, but somehow always seemed 10 steps ahead in everything that earned my family's approval. He was tall, tan, muscular in that annoying way where he never worked out but looked like he did. Star of his high school baseball team. Dated every blonde girl from 3 counties over. Got into the army straight out of school, and came back with medals and a chest full of stories that turned every family dinner into the Derek Show. Me? I went to a community college, studied marketing, worked nights at a grocery store, and eventually built a little digital ad agency in my basement that, surprise, surprise, started doing pretty damn well. But no one in the family ever asked about it. They thought I was just tolerating life, scraping by, doing something with computers, probably freeloading off the government or some tech bubble that would pop any day now. And I never corrected them because what was the point? They'd already decided who I was. But things changed when I met Leah. Leah was the kind of woman who didn't take shit from anyone. The first time she met Derek, he tried one of his charming little comments on her, something about how she must like a quiet project, and she smiled sweetly and said, "Only thing I like quiet is your exit." He didn't talk much after that. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like maybe someone saw me not as a joke, not as a placeholder, but as a man with something real to offer. Our wedding was supposed to be small, intimate, just close friends, a few family members we still talked to without swallowing glass. But my mom begged me to invite everyone, and I figured, why not? Let them see who I've become. Let them meet the woman I love and maybe, just maybe, shut the hell up for once. So I said yes. Invitations went out. RSVPs came back. Derek was the first one to respond, of course, and in all caps, like it was some kind of performance. Can't wait to see my little cousin all grown up. Rehearsal dinner rolled around in this cozy little restaurant we rented out. Brick walls, string lights, handmade cocktails with names like The First Dance and Cold Feet. Everyone seemed to be in good spirits, even my mom, who usually finds a reason to fret over the color of napkins or whether someone's gluten-free. Leah looked radiant in a deep blue dress that made her eyes look like the last minute of sunset. And then Derek walked in, late as usual, talking loud, laughing louder, and hugging everyone like he owned the place. He slapped me on the back and leaned in close, smelling like bourbon and cheap aftershave. "Mike," he said, dragging my name out like it was a joke already, "you finally found someone to tolerate you, huh?" He laughed like it was the funniest thing he'd said all night. And the table laughed with him, too, well, some of them. My aunt snorted. My dad chuckled and shook his head like, classic Derek. My mom gave that half smile she uses when she doesn't know which side to stand on. I didn't laugh. I didn't even blink. I just looked at him. Long and quiet. Let the air stretch out so tight around us that it practically hummed. He was waiting for me to throw something back, to take the bait, to be the old Mike, the one who'd either shrink into his seat or blurt something weird and make it worse. But I wasn't that Mike anymore. I nodded, real slow, smiled a little, and in my head I said, "You'll see." Because the truth was, I'd been planning something Derek and the whole damn family couldn't laugh away. Something they wouldn't see coming, even if they were sitting in the front row. There are memories you carry like a scar, always visible if you know where to look, always aching just a little when the weather shifts, or someone says the wrong thing at the wrong time in the wrong tone. My earliest memories of Derek are wrapped in that kind of dull ache. I remember being 8 years old and watching him throw a football clean across the yard into a garbage can, like it was nothing. My uncle clapped, my dad shouted, "That's my nephew," and I was there, holding a sketchbook full of pencil dragons, wondering why nobody cared that I'd taught myself shading that week. I tried to show my mom once, some big 2-page thing with wings and fire and everything. She looked down, said, "That's nice, honey," and then went back to peeling potatoes. Derek wasn't evil. He was just one of those people who figured out early that some of us are born with spotlights, and the rest of us are stagehands who need to learn our place. He had that natural charm that grown-ups confuse with maturity and that other kids mistake for leadership. When we were kids, I thought maybe if I hung close enough to him, some of it would rub off. Maybe I'd get to sit at the cool table during Thanksgiving or have one of the adults actually ask what I wanted to be when I grew up. Instead, I became the designated punchline. Derek liked to make people laugh. It didn't even matter if the joke was mean, so long as it landed. At family barbecues, I was Mopey Mike. When we were 12, he started calling me Bathroom Break because I always seemed to get up and leave right when everyone was laughing. That wasn't an accident. I'd get up because I could feel the heat in my face rising like lava, and I'd learned by then that anger made everything worse. I was that kid who learned to fold himself smaller in chairs, who practiced smiling in the mirror just to see if it looked normal. And the adults? They did what adults in families like mine always do when there's an obvious imbalance. They shrugged it off. "Derek's just teasing," or "Don't be so sensitive, Mike." I swear, if I had a nickel for every time someone told me to grow a thicker skin, I could have bought a whole new damn family. And I tried. I tried being tougher. I tried laughing with them. I tried being funnier, louder, smarter, cooler, but nothing ever stuck. Because they weren't interested in changing the way they saw me. That image was carved in stone. The worst part is how deep it got into my own bones. For a long time, I didn't even think I deserved better. I figured maybe they were right. Maybe I was the weird one, the soft one, the one who wasn't built for this world of sharp elbows and louder voices. That kind of belief settles in your chest like concrete. Even when you grow up, even when you move out, even when you build a life that's finally yours, it stays. There's something about a family dinner that shrinks you back to whatever size they decided you were when you were a kid. And I let it happen over and over again. I'd sit through birthday parties, Christmas mornings, Easter brunches, Derek telling some story about his latest job promotion or his new girlfriend who taught yoga on weekends, and I'd play the role. I'd smile when I was supposed to. I'd nod. I'd refill drinks. And when they asked what I was up to, I'd mutter something vague like, "Oh, just work stuff," because the truth was, no one really wanted to know. Not really. But here's the thing. Pain has a strange way of turning into fuel if you let it. I never fought back, not because I couldn't, but because I was waiting for the right moment. I was watching. I was learning. While Derek was collecting admiration, I was collecting lessons about people, about how they move, how they hide things, how they try to protect their illusions. And when I met Leah, it was like someone finally lit a fuse that had been there all along. We were on our second date, sitting in this hole-in-the-wall taco joint, when she said something that hit me right in the chest. I was telling a story about growing up, one of those awkward ones where I laughed too much at my own expense. And she just looked at me, dead serious, and said, "You know none of that was your fault, right?" It was the first time in my life someone had said that out loud. And I swear, it felt like something inside me cracked open and let the light in. From that point on, something shifted. I stopped minimizing myself. I started telling people exactly what I did for a living. I started owning the fact that I ran my own business, that I made good money, that I'd built something from nothing with my own damn brain and late nights and rejection and risk. I started believing I was worth more than the leftover crumbs of someone else's spotlight. And then came the wedding. Our wedding. The one moment where I got to choose who sat in what seat, who got the mic, who got to be heard. And then that comment at the rehearsal dinner, "You finally found someone to tolerate you, huh?" That was the moment that flipped the last switch in me. That was the final drop in a glass already full of decades of condescension. So, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this one go. Not this time. You know that feeling when something inside you clicks, not like a light switch, more like the slow grind of a gear that's been rusted shut for years, finally breaking loose and starting to turn? That's what it felt like the morning after the rehearsal dinner. I woke up with Leah's arm slung over my chest and my brain spinning like it had been dipped in jet fuel. The insult from Derek kept echoing, but not in that helpless, haunting way it used to. This time it lit a fire under my ribs. Something cold and clean. Something purposeful. I didn't say anything to Leah right away. She knew the look on my face, though. She always does. We were drinking coffee in the kitchen, sun slicing through the blinds in these long gold bars, and she just looked over the rim of her mug and said, "You're planning something, aren't you?" I nodded once, and she grinned like a kid who'd just found the first present under the tree. "Tell me," she said. "All of it." So I did. I laid it out slow and careful, watching her face for signs of doubt, but all I got back was that wicked little smile she gets when she knows mischief is on the menu. I told her I didn't want revenge exactly. I wanted poetry. I wanted elegance. I wanted to take everything they thought they knew about me and flip it on its head with the kind of style they didn't even think I had access to. I wanted Derek to see something that left him speechless, not because it was loud or vulgar or confrontational, but because it was undeniably better than anything he ever expected from me. Leah leaned forward, elbows on the counter, eyes bright. "You're not talking about a nicer cake or better flowers," she said. "You're talking about spectacle." I nodded again. "I want to give them something unforgettable," I told her. "Something that says, 'I am not who you thought I was,' without ever raising my voice." We started sketching out ideas like we were planning a heist. I remembered this article I read a while back, some piece about over-the-top weddings in Napa and the Hamptons. Most of it sounded like rich people lighting money on fire, but one thing stuck with me. A drone light show. Hundreds of machines flying in perfect sync, turning the sky into a living painting. That's when I knew. This wasn't just going to be a ceremony. It was going to be a statement. A reintroduction. Leah was all in. She always had a taste for the dramatic, and this was just the kind of crazy that lit her up. She pulled out her laptop, started looking up companies that specialized in high-end wedding productions, and I swear, within an hour she'd found 3 options that could do synchronized drone displays with custom patterns, music, and timing. I made a few calls, played it cool, never dropped the full picture, just asked what was possible, what was realistic, and how quickly we could get it done without tipping off the whole guest list. Once we locked in the drone crew, I turned my attention to the food. This part wasn't about glitz. It was about surprise. Derek always talked about how real men grilled their own steaks and drank whiskey without mixers. He loved to mock anything that sounded too fancy or artsy. So I thought, why not hit him where it hurts? I wanted a tasting menu. I wanted dishes with names he couldn't pronounce. I wanted ingredients from places he'd never even considered, served with wine pairings and stories from the chef that made every bite feel like a goddamn TED Talk. So I did something bold. I reached out to someone I never thought would even read the message, let alone respond. His name's Chef Raymond Cade, a guy with a Michelin star, a line of cookware, and more TV appearances than I could count. I found his website. Sent a message through the contact form like an idiot. I didn't expect anything. I didn't even tell Leah I'd done it. But 3 days later, I got an email back. Simple. Direct. Sounds interesting. Got time to talk. I just stared at it for a solid 5 minutes, then stood up and paced the living room like a lunatic. I called the number he left, hands shaking slightly, and when his assistant picked up, I swear I almost hung up out of nerves. But I didn't. We talked. I explained the vision, not just the food, but the context, the performance of it, the narrative. He was quiet for a long second, and then he said, "Most people hire me to make the wedding about them. You want to make the wedding about shutting someone else up quietly. That's different. I'm in." And, just like that, the plan was real. The wheels were in motion. The new version of me, the one they'd all missed while they were busy laughing at the old version, was going to arrive at that altar not just as a groom, but as a message. A message you couldn't ignore, even if you tried. And Derek? He was going to be sitting right in the front row. There's a kind of power in being underestimated for long enough that no one sees you coming, like driving through a fog while everyone assumes you're still stuck in the garage because they never heard the engine start. That was the whole game I'd been playing for years, whether I meant to or not, shrinking down, ducking attention, letting people fill in the blanks with whatever they assumed, because it was easier than trying to explain what I was actually building. Truth is, while the rest of my family was throwing cookouts and watching college football on weekends, I was writing ad scripts for Fortune 500 companies and quietly raking in contracts that turned my tiny startup into a multi-million-dollar machine. But nobody in my family ever asked. Not once. My mom thought I fixed websites. My dad thought I designed logos. Derek thought I probably ran someone's TikTok account for rent money, and honestly, I let them think it. Not because I was ashamed, far from it, but because letting them keep their version of me meant I could work in peace, unbothered and uninterrupted, without needing to justify my choices or deal with their commentary. It started small. A freelance gig here and there while I stocked shelves and managed registers at the local grocery store. Then one day a client sent me a referral, and that referral turned into 3 more, and before I knew it, I was doing digital campaigns for tech companies and direct-to-consumer brands that lived and died by their online presence. I worked while everyone else slept. I studied trends, algorithms, consumer psychology, even colors and how they affect clicks. I poured everything into it: time, energy, obsession, and it paid off more than I could have imagined. But you know what they say, success is best served silently until the moment it's not. And this wedding? This was the moment. Leah and I spent our evenings like conspirators. After the drone team confirmed availability, we moved fast. We signed contracts, locked in vendors, coordinated soundtracks, and even custom-built a countdown sequence that would start in the sky and end right as we kissed. It was choreography on a level I'd only seen in Olympic opening ceremonies and Apple product launches. I remember watching a preview on Leah's laptop, the two of us sitting cross-legged on the living room floor with Chinese takeout containers between us, and I just kept shaking my head in disbelief. She paused the video, looked at me with that spark in her eyes, and said, "You sure you want to drop all this on people who thought you were the family screw-up?" I didn't even blink. "Especially them," I said. Meanwhile, the rest of the wedding prep played out like any other small-town affair, which was exactly how I wanted it. We kept everything under wraps, told the planners to keep their mouths shut, and paid the extra fee to have the drone crew pose as a last-minute lighting team. The choir director, who Leah had found through a contact in New York, agreed to arrive in plain clothes and slip in during the second half of the rehearsal. We even rented a private space off-site for the final run-through, just to avoid anyone catching wind of what was coming. It was equal parts thrilling and exhausting. At one point, I stood in the middle of the empty venue, just staring up at the rafters while technicians rigged cables and lighting rigs above my head. The room was beautiful exposed brick, warm wood beams, tall windows that caught the sunset just right. I looked around and thought, if they only knew what's about to go down in here. This wasn't just a ceremony. This was a reset button on every label they'd ever given me, and I was going to push it so hard it would leave a dent. That week was a blur of quiet coordination and secret deliveries. I had shipments coming in from 3 different cities, backup plans for rain, fail-safes for sound, and a digital team watching the skies to make sure the drones didn't interfere with any local flight paths. My phone barely left my hand. I was managing 2 lives at once, the anxious, affable groom-to-be everyone expected, and the mastermind orchestrating a silent thunderstorm they wouldn't see until it was right on top of them. Every night before bed, Leah would lean against me and say, "This is going to be legendary." And I'd say no. This is going to be impossible to forget. The day before the ceremony, we did one last tech run at sunset. The drone operator, a soft-spoken woman named Tasha with a PhD in robotics and zero tolerance for mediocrity, launched the fleet just over the tree line. I stood back with my hands in my pockets while she flew them like they were an extension of her own body. 37 drones, glowing white at first, then blue, then gold, all moving in synchronized silence to the beat of the song I'd chosen. The formations were sharp, clean, deliberate, like the sky was finally speaking in a language only I understood. Leah stood beside me in the grass, arms crossed, watching it all unfold with this satisfied little smirk on her lips. And as the final shape lit up in the sky, a heart forming into our initials, dissolving into a burst of light, I didn't say a word. Because I knew, right then, this was going to work. This was the moment I'd been building toward my whole damn life. There's a very specific kind of silence that falls over a room right before something unforgettable happens. Thick, electric, a little tense, like everyone's holding their breath and nobody's quite sure why. That's what it felt like as I stood just behind the doors of the ceremony space, fingers curled into fists inside my jacket pockets, the low murmur of arriving guests leaking in from the hall. My heart wasn't pounding like I expected. It was steady, focused, the kind of calm that comes right before the storm when you're the one holding the match. The venue looked like something pulled from a dream, string lights floating above us like fireflies frozen in time, chairs arranged in perfect rows on either side of a polished stone aisle, soft music playing under the hum of conversation. Leah had outdone herself with the decor, but more than that, she knew exactly what she was doing, keeping things subtle, natural, even rustic, so that when the real moment came, it would hit like a freight train through stained glass. Derek was one of the first to arrive, of course, wearing some ridiculous three-piece suit with shiny shoes and that same smirk he's been carrying since junior high. He walked in like he owned the place, shaking hands, slapping backs, making jokes loud enough for everyone to hear. He made sure to sit in the front row, right side, with his legs spread wide and his sunglasses perched on his head like he was waiting for paparazzi. I watched from a small monitor backstage, sipping water and pacing slow, letting the image burn itself into my mind. Leah had told me earlier, don't give him too much energy. Just let the moment speak for itself. And I knew she was right. This wasn't about confrontation, it was about presentation. So I breathed deep, adjusted my cufflinks, and reminded myself that this whole thing wasn't about Derek. Not really. It was about me finally standing in my own name, in front of the very people who thought they already knew the story. The officiant, Pastor Jim, was a longtime friend of mine, funny, kind, and just the right amount of dramatic when it counted. He was in on the plan from the beginning, and I could see the sparkle in his eye even through the monitor feed as he took the stage and cleared his throat, quieting the crowd with a single raised hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice calm and warm, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Mike Reynolds and Leah Moore in a celebration of love, commitment, and surprise. But before we begin the ceremony, the groom has prepared something special." There was a pause, a beat of confusion that rolled across the room like a slow tide, and then the lights dimmed, and the back doors opened with a soft creak. At first, there was nothing but darkness outside. And then, one by one, the drones rose into the sky. They started as glowing white points, forming a wide arc over the venue's open rooftop. People gasped. Phones came out. Children pointed. My uncle actually dropped his coffee. And just when it seemed like it couldn't get stranger, the music started, a rich, rising melody that wasn't coming from any speaker system inside. It was coming from the far end of the aisle. That's when the gospel choir stepped forward. 12 voices, dressed in midnight blue robes with gold trim, harmonizing a custom arrangement Leah and I had commissioned months ago. a fusion of classic gospel and something modern, haunting, uplifting, spine-tingling. Their voices filled the air like thunder under moonlight, powerful and impossible to ignore. Every eye turned toward them, then upward again as the drones began to shift, spinning slowly into the shape of our initials, encircled by stars, pulsing in time with the music. I stepped up from the back then, walking slowly, deliberately, eyes scanning the crowd not for approval, but for awareness. I didn't need applause. I just needed them to finally see. And they did. One by one, mouths fell open. My aunt whispered something I couldn't hear. My mother covered her mouth. Even my dad sat a little straighter, blinking hard like he was trying to make sense of what he was witnessing. But it was Derek's face that told the whole story. He sat stone still, jaw slack, head tilted ever so slightly like a man who'd just realized the rules of the game had changed and he'd been playing checkers while someone else built a chessboard around him. For the first time in his life, he had nothing clever to say. No smirk. No shrug. Just silence and disbelief. The drones shifted again, this time forming a massive heart that pulsed above us like it was alive, beating in sync with the final notes of the choir's hymn. And as the last note rang out into the quiet night, the entire room erupted into stunned, reverent applause. I didn't look at Derek again. I looked at Leah. She was standing at the edge of the aisle now, dress flowing like wind over water, eyes locked on mine like we were the only two people in the world. And in that moment, it wasn't about revenge or proving anything or putting someone in their place. It was about showing the truth. And damn, it felt good to finally be seen. There are certain moments in life that land with the kind of force you can't prepare for, like a sudden downpour in the middle of what was supposed to be a clear sky, and that reception, what came after the vows. After the sky lit up and the gospel choir sang us into a new chapter, that was one of those moments where reality bent a little, where even the people who thought they'd seen it all had to stop and admit they'd never seen anything like this before. The ceremony had ended with the kind of applause you don't fake, the kind that rises up from somewhere deeper than politeness, and as the guests moved from the garden into the reception hall, I could see it written across their faces, confusion giving way to awe, curiosity morphing into respect, and in some cases, like Derek's, disbelief curdling into something that looked a lot like envy. The hall itself had been transformed while we were outside. Floor-to-ceiling white drapery lined the walls, lit from behind with warm amber lights that moved slowly like sunlight through whiskey. At the far end of the room, the string quartet played softly on a raised platform, easing guests into the next phase of the evening with something delicate and deliberate, like the palate cleanser before a richer course. And then, without any announcement, the curtains on the side wall pulled back to reveal an open-concept kitchen built right into the venue for the night, a gleaming, polished station where Chef Raymond Cade stood waiting in a jet-black apron, surrounded by staff who looked like they belonged in a fashion magazine rather than a kitchen. He wasn't smiling. Not yet. He looked like a man preparing for battle, focused, calm, calculating. And then he raised his hands and clapped twice. That's when the show began. Course after course came out, each one more intricate than the last. Tiny porcelain bowls of chilled lemongrass broth with edible flowers and chili oil droplets suspended like little planets, miniature towers of smoked duck breast on truffle polenta rounds, bite-sized sashimi cubes topped with citrus foam, and microgreens that made the entire table fall silent after the first taste. Plates looked like art, flavors crashed and resolved like music, and every dish came with a quiet explanation from the servers, notes about origin, intent. Ingredients flown in just yesterday from Japan or Italy or some mountain farm in Vermont that only sold to 3 restaurants in the country. Leah and I sat at our sweetheart table near the center of the room, watching it all unfold like we were watching a play we'd written in secret. Every now and then, she'd glance at me with that look that said, "Can you believe this is real?" And all I could do was squeeze her hand under the table and nod. Across the room, Derek was unraveling. He'd been quiet through most of dinner, picking at his plate like he didn't know whether to eat it or interrogate it. I caught him looking around more than once, trying to clock the details, the custom lighting rig, the discreet staff-to-guest ratio, the vintage wine list printed on thick, embossed paper at each place setting. At one point, he leaned back in his chair and turned to my dad, probably fishing for some kind of normalcy, and even my father, who once told me real men don't need more than salt and pepper on a steak, was nodding with quiet appreciation as he savored a bite of black garlic risotto. Then came the shift. The string quartet faded out slowly, the last note hanging in the air like a goodbye, and then the lights dimmed again, not sharply, but gradually, like the day was slipping into something darker, more mysterious. A subtle bass line began to pulse through the room, and the string players stepped off stage only to return seconds later, this time with electric violins and cello pickups, joining a live DJ who'd set up behind the bar in silence during the second course. What followed was a sound unlike anything I'd ever heard live, rich classical melodies woven into deep house beats and ambient drops that made people sit up straighter in their chairs, or get to their feet entirely. It wasn't a dance floor yet, but you could feel the room tilt in that direction, the energy shifting from admiration to engagement, like the whole event had caught a second wind. That's when Derek finally got up. He walked toward our table with that slow, deliberate swagger I'd seen 100 times at family functions, the kind he usually wore right before telling a story that ended with someone else's embarrassment. But there was something off in his walk now, a little hesitation in his shoulders, a look in his eyes like someone trying to find their footing on ground that had shifted too fast. He leaned down, voice low enough for only me to hear, and said, "How the hell did you afford this?" I took a sip of my drink, then looked him square in the face and smiled, not smug, not condescending, just calm, centered, and said, "Being tolerable pays well." His mouth opened like he had something to say, but nothing came out. I turned my attention back to Leah, who was already laughing quietly at something one of the bridesmaids had said, and Derek stood there a second longer before nodding slowly, then stepping back without another word. He didn't make a scene. He didn't start anything. But about 40 minutes later, while people were starting to dance and the dessert table had just been unveiled with handmade gelato and bourbon-infused pastries, I saw him slip out the side door with no fanfare. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't look back, except once. Just a glance over the shoulder, barely a second long, like he was trying to decide whether the night had beaten him or if he'd simply misjudged the battlefield. Either way, he was gone. And the music played on. There's something surreal about watching people you've known your whole life stumble through a brand new version of you, like they're walking into a room they thought they'd memorized, only to realize someone moved all the furniture and painted the walls while they weren't paying attention. That's what the aftermath of the wedding felt like, a slow unraveling of assumptions, one awkward glance or hushed whisper at a time, as guests started to come down from the high of spectacle and realized they'd just witnessed something none of them had seen coming. Least of all my family. Leah and I found a quiet corner behind the main hall where the music softened and the crowd noise thinned to a gentle hum. She slipped off her heels with a sigh, resting her head lightly on my shoulder, and whispered, "You did it." I didn't answer right away because my head was still spinning, not from nerves, but from the sheer weight of what had just happened. Months of planning, years of biting my tongue, and a lifetime of playing the background all converging into a single evening that now hung in the air like smoke from a fireworks finale. "I'm not sure I even know what I did," I finally muttered, but she just laughed, low and satisfied. "You turned the tables without flipping them," she said. "That's harder than it looks." The venue staff moved like shadows around us, clearing plates and dimming lights, while guests floated from table to table with wide eyes and half-finished sentences. I caught snippets of conversation, people guessing at how much the drones must have cost, someone joking about needing to up their own wedding game, an aunt of mine nervously asking if she should have worn something fancier. Nobody quite knew what to say, which, honestly, was the whole point. I didn't want praise. I wanted silence, the kind that comes when you finally force people to stop and think. And yet, even in that glow, even in that earned satisfaction, there it was, that old familiar tug, that ancestral guilt, like a thread pulling from inside my chest, whispering that maybe I'd gone too far. That maybe making a statement like this, one so public, so unmistakable, was more than just poetic, it was aggressive. A show of power they weren't prepared to witness. And right on cue, my mother found me. She appeared like she always did in moments like this, quiet, almost ghostly, never making a scene, but with a presence that carried more weight than the words she usually held back. Her hand touched my arm gently, and I turned to find her eyes already welling up, though she wasn't crying. Not quite. Just full. Full of something unspoken. "You didn't have to do all this," she said softly, looking around the room like she was trying to take in everything all at once. The lights, the music, the performance. For a second I said nothing. I let her words hang there, suspended between us like fog on an early morning field, thick and quiet and impossible to walk through quickly. Then I looked her in the eye and replied, not angry, not bitter, just clear. "I really did." Her expression didn't change much, but something shifted in her posture. Her shoulders dropped a little. Her eyes flickered with something like understanding, or maybe resignation. I couldn't tell if she was proud or disappointed, and I realized I didn't care anymore. Not in a cruel way. Just in a way that meant I no longer needed her validation to feel full. The version of me who used to seek that out had finally walked off stage, and he wasn't coming back. She gave me a small nod, then reached out and smoothed a wrinkle from my jacket like she used to when I was a kid getting dressed for church, and then she walked away without another word. The rest of the night passed in waves, people coming up to congratulate us, others clearly too stunned or awkward to say much at all. A few guests left early, clearly uncomfortable with what they'd just seen, but most stayed, lingering longer than planned, as if hoping to solve a puzzle they hadn't realized they were holding. Friends from my side were ecstatic, full of grins and claps, and that was incredible over and over. Leah's family, especially her sister, looked like they'd been waiting for this kind of magic their whole lives and finally found someone who delivered. But not a word from Derek. Not a glance. Not a snide remark. Not even a goodbye. The table where he'd been sitting stayed half empty for most of the dancing, his drink still there with the condensation sliding down the side like a slow drip from a broken faucet. I knew he was gone before anyone said it out loud, and honestly, I wasn't surprised. What do you say when the version of someone you've always laughed at shows up more polished, more poised, more powerful than anything you've ever managed yourself? We cleaned up late, not wanting to leave the glow too quickly, not quite ready to let the night end. By the time Leah and I finally collapsed into bed, still half-dressed, shoes abandoned by the door, it was almost midnight. She fell asleep fast, her hand curled under her chin like a child, peaceful in a way only someone who knows exactly who she is can be. I lay there a little longer, staring at the ceiling, my mind still replaying moments in reverse. Derek's silence, the drone spinning above us, the applause, the choir's final note hanging like incense in the air. And then my phone buzzed. A single text. From Derek. "Call me tomorrow. Please." I didn't respond. Not yet. Some moments are meant to sit in silence a little longer before you decide whether to open the door or keep it shut. There's a strange kind of stillness that settles over you the morning after a storm you created on purpose, not a storm you tried to avoid or survive, but one you lit the match for and then walked straight into with your eyes wide open. The day after the wedding, the sun came up like it always does, soft and gold, indifferent to whatever battles you fought under its last descent, and I lay there in bed beside Leah, staring at the ceiling like it might suddenly offer a verdict I hadn't asked for. She was still asleep, curled under the blanket with her hair tangled and her breathing slow, the kind of deep sleep that only comes after doing something that mattered, something final, something that stripped a layer of skin and left you raw but satisfied. I didn't want to move, But the buzz of the text from Derek still sat in my chest like an ember that refused to die out completely, glowing quietly under all the noise I thought I'd buried. I got up, made coffee slow, and stood barefoot in the kitchen watching steam rise from the mug like it might answer the question I couldn't quite form. What do you do when the man who spent half your life laughing at your expense suddenly wants to talk? What does that conversation even look like? What could he possibly say that would undo years of damage and doubt and bruises you were never allowed to show? The voicemail was short. Less than a minute. His voice came through quieter than I expected. Slower. Like he was choosing his words with care, which was new for Derek. "Hey," he said, after a long pause, like even that word had weight. "I don't know what to say. That was something else last night. I mean, really. I didn't expect it. And maybe that's the point. Look, I think I've been a dick. Probably for a long time. More than you deserved. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I do. Just call me, okay? If you want to. I'd like to talk. If you're willing." That was it. No excuses. No justifications. Not even the word sorry. But it wasn't nothing either. I stared at the phone for a long time after the voicemail ended, thumb hovering over the screen, not really knowing if I wanted to delete it or play it again, just to make sure I heard it right. I didn't do either. I just slipped the phone back onto the counter and walked out onto the porch where the air still smelled like dew and wood and something faintly burnt from the fire pit that had gone out some time after midnight. Leah came out 10 minutes later, barefoot like me, her fingers wrapped around her own coffee mug, and we sat in silence on the steps, watching the morning stretch itself awake across the yard. She didn't ask what was on my mind. She didn't need to. She just bumped her shoulder against mine and waited. "I got a message," I finally said. "From him?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Yeah." She didn't say anything for a while, just nodded, then looked out at the trees like they might weigh in with their own opinion. "You gonna call him back?" I shrugged. "I don't know yet." It wasn't a lie. I really didn't. We went for a walk after that, just the two of us, down the trail behind the cabin we'd rented for the weekend, the dirt soft under our shoes, birds cutting little songs into the quiet like they were sketching lines on the air. The sun filtered through the leaves in streaks, warm on the back of my neck, and every now and then she'd reach out and grab my hand, just to hold it, just because she could. It felt good to walk without an agenda, without a speech rehearsed in my head or a plan tucked into my pocket. It felt good to be quiet without the quiet feeling heavy. We ended up at the lake, where the water was so still it looked like a sheet of glass laid over something fragile, and we sat on a bench that faced the shore, letting the silence stretch out until it felt like part of us. Leah looked over at me then, eyes soft but sharp, like she could see right into the mess of thoughts still spinning behind my eyes. "Do you feel better now?" she asked, and it wasn't a question meant to be answered quickly. I thought about that for a long second. I thought about Derek's voice, uncertain and uncharacteristically human. I thought about my mother's face the night before, full of something she couldn't name. I thought about the drones spelling out our names in the sky, and the way the choir's final note felt like it had cracked something open inside me. And then I smiled, not wide, not for show, just a small shift in my face that came from somewhere deep. "I feel seen," I said. That was the truth of it. I didn't know if I'd ever called Derek back. Maybe I would. Maybe I wouldn't. I didn't know if he meant what he said or just felt cornered by the fact that I'd finally stopped being the version of myself that made him feel bigger by comparison. I didn't know if forgiveness was something I owed him or if it was something he'd have to figure out how to live without. But I knew this. I didn't need his understanding to validate my existence anymore. I had nothing left to prove to anyone sitting in folding chairs judging a man they never bothered to look at properly. I had Leah. I had peace. I had myself, finally, in a way I hadn't since I was a kid holding a sketchbook in a backyard full of laughter that wasn't meant for me. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that had always been the point.